Hey, this is Jon Gordon with Positive You, and today my guest is Lecrae. Lecrae, how you doing?
Doing well.
So, people call you a hip hop artist. Some call you a Christian rapper. I know you are so much more than that. Like, how would you describe what you do during this time?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I just try to look at myself as a catalyst for restorative change, and maybe music is an outlet for that. Maybe it's writing. Maybe whatever means that are available to me. I want to be able to use them for restorative change in the
I
world.
love that. I follow you on Twitter, and I just love your tweets. I love your heart, the words you share, just pure brilliance. I mean, I think it's incredible how you're restoring people during this time.
I appreciate that. Thank you. That means a lot.
So I got involved in Peace Prep Academy because of you. You talked about that this is a way to really create change that we need right now in our country. Like this is real change.
Mhm.
How did you get involved in Peace Prep Academy, and then how do you see it as a vehicle for change and also for our future?
Yeah. Over 5 years ago, a good friend of mine, Benjamin Wills, had reached out to me, and he wanted to start a school in what was the pretty much the worst neighborhood in all of Atlanta. English Avenue, disenfranchised community, was known as the heroin capital of the South. Hadn't been a school there for decades. The last school that was there, Gladys Knight graduated from that school. And so it was a really crazy, outlandish obstacle. But what we, had noticed was that there were no educational opportunities for these kids. And oftentimes the quality of education is linked to property taxes and how much money can be poured into the school. And so obviously this area was just totally decimated. And so there was no opportunity, but yet there were kids everywhere who needed an education, and brilliant, bright kids who just were lacking. And so I got behind Ben, put my minimal forces to work, and a school was established. And that was 5 years ago. We started with kindergartners, and now this is fifth grade. It's up to 60 students. And it's just been a blessing to see it come to fruition.
It is incredible. I donated to support it. How can other people donate to support it? Because I want people to know about the school. I'm investing in it. I will continue to invest in it. I see what this school can and will do. I know these kids, and they have such bright futures, amazing hearts, right? Their spirits are incredible.
Yeah.
And so how can more people invest in the school and join you and me and what we're doing?
Yeah. First of all, go to peaceprep.com where you can learn all about the school. Some amazing things have been happening just within the neighborhood. Peace Prep was linked to a development company. A friend of mine who worked at the school started a development company. That development company has gone on to build some very quality, affordable living spaces around the school. Financial literacy classes are being provided for people over the summer who can move into this building. And a lot of these families are kids that go to this school. So now they're getting quality living and quality education. And so it's just a beautiful environment. And these kids are able to blossom. They're able to go to school. They're able to get the quality education that they need. They're able to eat. That's a big deal. Just to be able to get a meal. They're being nourished mentally and emotionally. It's just an all around whole child, whole family approach to education. And so you are literally changing the city. Were there not a school, there would not have been these affordable living spaces next to the school. And people getting involved in the school 5 years ago are seeing their efforts and their investment literally transform a community.
Do you see this as a model going forward for other communities and other schools?
I definitely do. I've seen pieces of it work. I've seen the housing and affordable living component try to work with the elementary schools in the area, And the problem was still the tax dollars were not fueling that school in the way that it needed to happen. So the quality of the education suffered, the resources, the ability to pay the teachers. And yet what we're seeing here is people investing in this school. And it's like a private school model, but the parents pay what they can, obviously. And you can sponsor a family if you wanted to go to the Peace Preparatory Academy. But what it does is it does create a model for whole family, because when the whole family's involved, then the community changes. And so I think that's a great model moving forward.
Why do you see this as a way to create the future, to bridge the gap from the past to the future, and especially what we're dealing with right now with all the racial challenges that we're experiencing?
Yeah. So the reason why that educational disparity exists is because historically, segregation took place, and, where the money was, there was redlining, and there were limited opportunities for the Black community to get certain types of jobs, certain types of education. There was a ceiling on them. And so what it did was it left certain communities with minimal resources because they just didn't have the access. And so now communities like that are decimated, and you do have some first generation individuals who are able to move out and get better jobs, but they're detached, they're removed from the community in order to go work in, somewhere else in a different part of town. And so the tax money is not going back into that community. And so, what's happened is just because of the historical, redlining and issues of racial segregation and racial inequality, it's left communities like this hurting desperately over the years with no opportunity to move forward. And so what this does is it gives us a chance to stimulate those communities, to give them quality education. Obviously, they're getting jobs because there's the development corporation that exists in the community provides job training. So they can get on the site. They're actually building their own homes in this community. And so it's just a holistic approach to where there's economic stimulation, educational stimulation, and financial literacy is taking place as well for those people who never had access to this type of understanding because of racial inequalities.
Man, it's awesome. It's really really brilliant. I moved to Atlanta right after college. Lived in Atlanta for 7 years. I started the Phoenix organization years ago, and the Phoenix was about rising from the ashes. We would raise money and volunteer for youth-focused charities. So I worked with Evander Holyfield. We did the golf tournament for the Boys and Girls Club. So I would bring all these young professionals, mostly white. We would bring them together in the Buckhead area where I was a bartender. I would meet all these people bartending. Wasn't a Christian yet. And so I would bring them all in, and then we would actually start getting involved in the community and engage in the community and raise money and give it to all these charities that were focused on youth-focused charities. And to see so that was my passion then, and then to see what you're doing now at a whole other level, a greater level, a bigger level, a holistic level to actually create change, because this is what I'm passionate about, right? How do we create change? And I believe we need to have massive investment in the communities that you're talking about that we have ignored for so long, that we have, that have not been funded. And when people talk about the problems in the Black community, right? They talk about that. They ignore the history that brought us to this moment, right? Absolutely. Everyone seems to ignore why it is the way it is.
Right.
And so what you're saying is, we now have to, we know the way it is. We have to understand the history, and now we have to basically invest. And I would like to see government dollars do that. Besides criminal justice reform, I think this is one of the greatest things we can do for our future. You agree with that?
I totally agree. I think, that's, the beauty of, us being in a free market society. We're also free to make compassionate choices. You know what I mean? We're free to use our money in ways that benefit others. And as a Christian, I think that's a biblical principle. I think that's oftentimes we make issues of compassion or justice political ideologies, when really they're just moral, ethical, biblical principles that we can apply, we should apply. So it doesn't matter, you shouldn't have to, say, well, what party aligns with this, or what politician aligns with this. Obviously, we want to see that happen. But we can say, well, even if I don't find that in our political system, I can do the work that needs to be done. And so that's what I think we're seeing happen, is the work is being done. And like you said, we have to look at the history, because there's always a reason why, when you ask why, that's when it starts to get dicey. It's okay to go feed the poor. When you ask why they're poor, then it starts to get a little tricky. And that's some of the things that I think we can change. I think there's a trickle down effect. And one other point I'll just make is a friend of mine works specifically with the homeless community here in Atlanta. And, talking to one particular individual who was experiencing homelessness and hearing the story made all the difference. This person grew up in foster care, was treated terrible in the foster care system and abused and ran away. Now, you got to imagine a person who runs away from foster care, doesn't know their biological parents, doesn't know any existing family, has zero contact with anybody. And so that person is at 15, 14 years old, completely alone in the world. And then you fast forward 10 years at 24, 25, and you're like, why are you homeless? Well, I was just a victim of this terrible circumstance. And that put me in the situation that I'm in.
It's powerful to understand the story. Let's talk about your story. You, years ago, were not doing well in life. You were not maybe the most model, ideal kid, and that you would come on to be this world changer. How did that happen for you in your life?
Obviously, I had a burden and desire. I think I had a great mother who invested in me. I did grow up in a fatherless home. I did grow up around a lot of very negative influences. But I had an incredible mother who really invested her time, effort, and energy into making sure that I read, that I was exposed to different things. And then I had a grandmother who was a devout Christian and who would take me around, and she didn't have much, but what she had, she always gave, and she was just a servant. And so those were two primary examples that I had as a backdrop, even as I was, chasing after, gold, girls, and glory. You know what I mean? Even as I was in the midst of all of that, I had those backdrops. And I think I had my spiritual transformation happened for me as a 19, 20-year-old man, where I just realized that if I believe that I have worth and purpose, then it comes from somewhere, and I really need to investigate, the source of my worth and my purpose. And I think God opened my eyes, allowed me to become a follower of Jesus. And from there, it opened up a new world and new categories for me to say, well, wait a minute, if I have worth and purpose, then everybody does. And if everybody has worth and purpose, then why aren't people treated that way? And oh my gosh, what can I do? And how do I use my abilities to make a difference in this world? And that really put me on this trajectory.
How do we make it so that God's worth and purpose, for us, our worth and purpose in God is greater than the gold and the glory and the girls?
Mm-hmm. That's good. Well, I think that ironically, when you take a $100 bill, if you crush it up and you spit on it and you tell that $100 bill it's worth nothing, it never loses its worth, right? It's always worth $100 bill, $100. And that's us. Some of us have experienced some traumatic circumstances. We've been told we have no worth, no value. And we've been told unless you are, used in these particular ways, then you're worthless. Unless, you got the gold or the girls or the glory connected to you, then you're worthless. And the truth of the matter is you had inherent worth from the jump. You never needed to add those things to yourself to feel a sense of purpose. And so Uh, I think that when you take that same $100 bill and you use it as wallpaper or you use it as toilet paper, you've wasted it, right? It had worth and value and it could have done so much. You could have bought groceries and you just wasted it. Well, that's our lives. When we we're so dynamic. We're made with, purpose and infinite worth and value. And when we use our lives for frivolous and things that are not, that don't hold eternal or restorative value, we're wasting our lives. And so money is an incredible tool. It's a great slave, a terrible master, And so if you use it in a way to do work and to change things, then it's great. And I think that's what sometimes we have to get to the end of ourselves, before we see that we're more than those things.
And Jesus changed my life at 35 years old. How has your faith influenced you and changed you and also inspired the work that you do?
I think becoming a follower of Jesus made me reconsider what was a priority for me. Because, to be a follower of his or a disciple of his is to say, I want to walk in your ways. I want to see things the way that you see things. And, that's sacrificial. It takes a lot of sacrifice. It takes you saying, I'm willing to put off some of the dreams that I had and embrace, your plan. And I mean, that's what he did for the disciples. They were fishermen, and it said they dropped their nets immediately. They said, all right, I'm done with this. I'm coming to follow you. So I think there was just that initial period of time where I said, I need to learn who you are and learn what you want from me. And just be able to have a general sense of that so that I can move forward. And then I began to integrate what I learned into my everyday life. And so now that I think I have some of those foundations in place, I just continue following, continue learning, continue applying all of that truth that I'm learning.
When did you first realize you had this musical gift?
I love music as a kid. I love music when I was 11 years old. And I started, writing songs 10, 11 years old, just for fun. By 13, I realized that we would have these battles at lunchtime. And I would win all the time. And I was like, wow, I must be really good at this. I'm like winning all these battles. And so I knew that it was a gift that I had. And, I remember making a song, I don't remember. I was probably like 13, 14 years old. And people gravitated to it. And I thought, okay, this is something. I got something here. And I wanted to pursue it. Didn't know quite how, but I knew I had something.
So we're going through a really challenging time in our country right now. How is this time influencing your music, what you're thinking about, and also what you're doing? I know you just came out with a new song, Drown, with John Legend. Yeah. Talk about how this time is really causing you to go deeper with your work.
Yeah. Well, music is, in many ways, music is a soundtrack to our lives. Mm-hmm. And so it can be a soundtrack to my life or it can be a soundtrack to our lives. Sometimes when you're connected to people, if it's a soundtrack to your life, it's a soundtrack to everyone else's life because you're connected to them. You're saying things in a way that everyone can process and understand and resonate with. And then sometimes if you're disconnected from people, it doesn't resonate because your soundtrack is so unique and it's just like, you may needed to say that, but it did not connect with the world at large. So maybe I'm a running back for the Rams and I twist my ankle and I write a song about that. Everyone probably can't relate to that song. But if I'm connected to people and I talk about the underlying issues of not being able to do what I love, of feeling as if I'm worthless because I'm on the sideline, I think that everyone can connect to that in a deeper way. And so what's happened for me is that I've been trying to stay connected to people. Just because we're socially distant doesn't mean we have to be relationally distant. And so I've been trying to stay connected to people. And what that's done for me is helped me to tell my story in a way that connects with other people. I know what it feels like it's like my head is underwater. I don't know what's going to happen next, and I need answers. My needing answers may look different from your needing answers, but we all need them. And so that's kind of where my music is going. But it's also wanting to provide hope, because I believe as a Christian, the tomb is empty and death is defeated. And so racism, pandemics, global warming, none of these particular things can change the reality that the tomb is empty. And so I do have an eternal hope, and I want other people to be able to move forward and say, you know what, even though this is terrible, I can still be hopeful in the midst of it.
I love that. How do you address racism from a biblical, spiritual, Christian perspective?
That's good. I think that racism, it's a nuance. It's not the center of what God is wanting us to address, but the center of what God wants us to address, obviously, which is to love the Lord with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves, is wrapped up in loving our neighbor as ourselves. And so when you see, you take the New Testament and the Church of Acts gets started, it's extremely Jewish, right? It's a Jewish world. Jesus' initial followers were all Jewish. And so they were just used to Jewish ways of life. That was the culture that they understood, that they existed in. The book of James is writing to a primarily Jewish audience. He's in Judea. There's just not much thought of non-Jewish people entering into this faith. And then here comes Paul, and Paul's like, we're going to Ephesus, we're going to Rome, we're going to Galatia, and this introduction of these Gentile, non-Jewish people who have the same rights and the same access to sonship, daughtership, heirs to the kingdom. And so Peter and James have to wrestle with that and say, wait, I thought this was this. And Paul's like, no. Everyone deserves to have this all. The dividing walls got to come down. Everyone gets access to this. And that was tough, because we like things the way that they are. And we were moving at I'm comfortable here. And I think oftentimes racism it's a power issue. It's a comfort issue. It's a not knowing, it's a fear issue. What happens when these dividing walls come down? Do I have to share this? And how does this, and these people don't know about this, and we're used to this. And I think Paul says, no, the wall has to come down. Everyone has to have equal access. Everyone has to be treated like sons and daughters. Everyone is to experience this love that God provides. And so we just want to flesh that out in society. And I think that's the way we can look at racism through biblical eyes.
And wouldn't you agree that I saw you tweet that the enemy is trying to deceive and distort and divide? And you see that. It's so funny because I actually did an article on the 5 Ds the same day that you actually tweeted that, which was pretty wild. Right. And you talked about that. I wrote a book called The Garden, which is about the 5 Ds that the enemy uses to try to divide us and destroy us. Mm. And it's almost like, for me, racism is an expression of evil. So it causes us to look outside, to see color, to see differences rather than uniqueness. And so the enemy's always trying to divide, where God is saying we're all one and unite. How would you approach that in terms of how you view the world and how you approach it?
Yeah, I think it's beautiful to appreciate the uniqueness and the diversity within humanity. I think it's beautiful to appreciate the variances and the different cultures and foods. We love those particular things. We have to learn to love each other and to appreciate one another, and to want all of that person, and not just the part of that person that we like, right? Like, I want all of this person, not just the culture, not the food or the music or the style. I want that whole person. And so, you're right. It's an evilness that wants us to not appreciate those differences. We're not asking for uniformity, where uniformity is everybody's the same. We're saying for unity. There's unity in diversity, where we can be connected, but different. And I think oftentimes, that's what Satan wants us to do. He wants us to objectify one another, to treat each other like objects and only be transactional and get the stuff out of each other that we like and not love each other holistically. So give me your music, give me this, but I don't want you. And God is saying, no, I want you to wrestle with loving this person as this whole person, because it's going to grow you in some ways. It's going to challenge you. It's going to grow you, and it's going to be beneficial for you all collectively.
As someone who has such a huge platform, and you bridge the world so often, right? Because you're so involved in social justice, making an impact, impacting your community. And yet also you work with a lot of churches that may be typically, a large majority or white congregations. And you might, speak at those and sing at those. What do you see your role in all of that is? And also do you feel the huge responsibility of that? Because it could be a big burden too.
Yeah, it's unique, and it's something that I'm processing every day. Obviously, when you are speaking about very nuanced things, there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of struggle with that. When people can't understand things, they tend to fear them and they tend to be hesitant. And so, the tension for me is fighting to be loving and gracious, but also to walk in integrity. And so, you have to be honest, and you have to be forthright, and you have to be truthful. But at the same time, you have to let people know that you're still loved in this process. I want to see change happen. I need you to do some internal work, but I'm not writing you off and saying that, I don't want anything to do with you. I'm saying that we need one another. And for that to happen, there's some work that's got to be done from your vantage point on your side. So I think it is a unique space and a unique place. And I ask God for grace daily to help me navigate it.
It's hard. We're both fans of sports, so it's almost like you're a coach, right? You gotta love them, but then you gotta push them to change and to grow and go through that discomfort, right?
Exactly. That's a perfect analogy.
That's so cool. How do you balance the success you've had without allowing that success to get to you, affect your ego? I saw a great clip where you talked about that. Can you share more about not allowing the success to affect your ego?
Yeah. I think that's a huge piece of it, is that there's everything. The funny thing is, you don't have to try to drift into selfishness, to drift into being self-absorbed. It's not something you have to work at all. If you just chill out, you'll land somewhere in the ocean of selfishness and self-absorption. Right. You have to work hard. No one drifts into selflessness. No one drifts into the pool of humility. That's something you have to swim toward. You got to work your way over there. And so that is just something that you have to be cognizant of. Is like, humility is a pursuit. It's not something that is going to happen by osmosis. Selfishness is my default. Self-absorption is my default. And so I've got to work hard at seeing outside of myself and seeing others as better than myself, seeing others as worthy of everything that I'm worthy of. And so that is a task. When everyone is praising you, and everyone's like, yeah, you're the guy, hearing all that with a sober perspective is work. You got to work at that.
Usually performing on huge stages, speaking and singing to thousands of people. How have you pivoted during this time? Like, how have you changed, and what are you doing now as a writer and speaker? I know I've had to do it. I'm sure you in a huge way have had to do it.
Yeah. That's great. It's made me do a lot of recalibrating. It's made me process and go through the processes. Fortunately for me, financially, performing was a stream of income for me, not, the primary source of my income. So I'm very grateful for that. But what it's done for me is it's made me say, How can I, let me process what are my gifts? What are my passions? What are my talents? Do I want to go back to school? No. Do I want to, start a McDonald's? No. But I've had the time to think about those particular things. And one of the things that I do get excited about, just because there's a justice element connected to it, is real estate. And so, just being able to provide affordable living and economic stability in communities. Obviously, there's financial responsibility in that whole piece, and you want to be financially responsible. But I think if you do a good job at it, it'll benefit them and it benefits you. No one wants to support somebody that they don't think is doing a good job. So that's been one of the ways that I've been kind of using my time is learning more about real estate and getting involved in some different areas.
That is so cool. I did not expect that answer. That is really cool in terms of, because I know you're an entrepreneur though, and I know that you're creative and musical, but yet you also have this entrepreneur side where you own your own label. Can you talk about balancing creativity and entrepreneurism?
Yeah. So that's the beauty is when you start off, you're an artist, and an artist is like, I just want to paint this picture and people to see it and appreciate it. And then as you get more seasoned in your artistry, you become a craftsman. And a craftsman, it has an end user in mind. There's a utilitarianism that has to work with your art for it to make sense. And that's probably where the entrepreneurial piece comes in. Is sure, you want to make this incredible tennis shoe with all these great colors and all this stuff, but if it's uncomfortable, no one's going to buy it. So you got to make it, there's a utilitarian use for this shoe that you want to get crazy with the creativity piece for. And I think for me, art was a way to express myself. But the entrepreneur in me said, okay, we've got to become craftsmen and make this user accessible type of art. And that's just carried me into different areas and different spheres to where, film production, into real estate. It's kind of like, okay, yes, that house should look extremely nice, but if the airflow doesn't work, then it's not going to be comfortable. This part of the house is going to be too hot. So just thinking through things like that has been helpful for me. The skills are transferable. You just have to fill in the gaps of the information that you don't know.
You talked about also acting, and you've been in some movies. What role would you want to play most right now if you could play a role?
Oh man, I would love to play David in the Bible. I'd love to do a whole epic movie of David's life. I think that movie it's definitely a rated R movie. We know that there's a lot of dead bodies going everywhere. Goliath's head getting chopped off and all kinds of crazy stuff. But I think that's just it's the most fascinating story to me. And what an incredible character. What a picture of who we are as human beings. This imperfect guy who's a bleeding heart for God, doesn't get it right, but God knows that and uses him in amazing ways, and just, has crazy failures, but is still a man after God's own heart. So I would love to play David in a movie.
Man, I love that. Talking about David, you're a believer in second chances. And so what do you think about cancel culture?
Yeah, cancel culture to me is so toxic. And I think, well, let me say this. There's a level of accountability to where it's beneficial, but not the canceling part. I don't think we're using behavior modification and fear tactics and hatred to challenge people's perspective. And I mean, sometimes, even as you say that, I think through, has that been necessary in certain instances to bring about justice? I do like the public awareness of things. I do like the consistency of people bringing awareness to issues. What I don't like is people feeling as if the threat is that you will now be worthless and be thrown away. because of something that you did wrong. So I think accountability is great. I think hatred and threats to throw someone away is a problem. I think that's problematic. God doesn't.
Good. It's tough, right? It's a tough situation because we have to call out the wrongs that people have done. We have to show that people who we think are perfect maybe aren't perfect and haven't done the right things. We got to call it evil when it exists. And at the same time, we know that people can change. We know that there's redemption and restoration. And going back to restoration, let's talk about your new album. What made you go in that direction? And it's your newest one. Mm-hmm. What was the heart behind that?
I just really wanted to see people believe that this was not the end, that second chances exist. I wanted to see people in the worst of circumstances believe that, wait a minute, even for me, absolutely, even for you. And that's what restoration is. Restoration is an opportunity for a person who's committed the most heinous crime to know that's not the end. A person who's been divorced to know that's not the end. A person who's experienced something very traumatic to know that's not the end, that the story's not over. And so I wanted to make an album that encouraged people, that their souls will find rest again, even in the darkest of seasons.
And how is God restoring you during this time as we come to a close of the podcast?
Man, in so many ways, I think I'm a big advocate for mental health, and I went through a very dark season of depression and anxiety that God has just lifted me out of, thank God. And now I just see a lot of dots connecting. There's a lot of skill sets and tools that I've had in my belt, and I haven't figured them all out. I don't quite understand the investment world or fully understand the real estate world or fully understand, franchising or any of those particular things, but I'm passionate about them. And I see God bringing wisdom and information and just different people into my circle to give me insight and restore a sense of, listen, Lecrae, you're more than a song. You're more than, your contributions in music. There's so many other aspects of what you do. There's film and television, there's philanthropic stuff, and there's so much more. And I think God has given me these glimmers to where I realize, like, oh, this isn't the end. There's the God's still telling the story. And so it continues, and let me lean into that.
So good. I suffered with depression too years ago. And when I came to faith, that, in many ways over time went away. Like now I don't feel that anymore. I realized my mind didn't need fixing. My soul needed healing.
That's good.
And so with you, in terms of, have you seen how your healing has allowed you now to be someone who helps others heal?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I say that all the time, that my scars are the evidence that wounds can heal. So look at my scars, because these are the evidence that what you're going through doesn't have to last forever. I'll tell you a quick story. I'll never forget it. I was in high school. I was riding on a shopping cart, supposed to be working, putting away groceries for customers, riding on the cart flips over, rips my fingernail out of my finger. I don't know what's happened. I just see blood. I'm running to the grocery store, like, I need help. The butcher runs over to me and is like, let me see. And he looks at my finger and he says, you'll be fine. And I was like, I will. And he's like, yeah, you'll be fine. He said, look at me. And he was missing like 2 fingers. And his scars calmed me down. I had known this man. He was a great guy. He was funny. He was jovial. And he was calm during the time when I was panicking. And he was like, you'll be fine. I've got this kind of scar and I'm fine. What you got is not this. You'll be fine. And it was like, oh, okay, great. So
that's a great analogy. Yeah. So how can how can we encourage others as we go forward? Would you like to share just some encouraging words to others during this challenging time? We're going to air this pretty soon, and
Yeah.
I want people to know about your music and about Peace Prep Academy, but also you offer incredible encouragement. As I said, I follow you on social media. Love what you post all the time. What are some words of encouragement you can share with people right now?
Yeah, what I would say is that I love Psalm 23, and it says, we walk through the valley of the shadow of death. We fear no evil, for your rod and your staff comfort me. And I would say that, when you're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, David is saying he's a sheep. Sheep are defenseless animals. They don't have the skills necessary to figure out their way. And yet David is fearless going through this valley. And he's fearless because the shepherd is with him. And there's an encouragement that, man, God is overseeing everything that we're dealing with, that everything that we're going through. And we can trust that, even though we feel defenseless, even though we feel like we don't have the skill set or the tools, that God is consistent and he's walking with us through the valley of the shadow of death. And what's cool to me is that, the shadow of death, the shadow, you cannot have a shadow without there being light. And so even for the shadow to have presence, there has to be a light shining. And so darkness cannot exist. It can't exist as a force when light shines. It just can't. It just has to leave immediately. And so the darkness that we may be experiencing right now is just a shadow. That means light is shining, and God's light is always shining. So you can find encouragement in the reality that this is a season, this is a shadow, this does not have long-standing eternal effects on who we are, and that can give us hope to move forward. If you need a boost of hope, lean into that reality that this is a shadow, and that means light is shining.
So good. And you made me think about the fact that we could be a light for others, during this time. And so
Absolutely.
with Peace Prep Academy, if we all find one way to be a light for others, like I had asked myself during this time, what can I do? How can I help others? And it was you. It was Peace Prep. It was like, okay, I can make a difference in kids' lives and their future. I can't necessarily get involved in criminal justice reform. I can advocate for it. I believe it needs to change. But I'm not a policy person. I'm not a legal person. But I can do this. So would you say each person needs to find their one thing that they can do to make a difference?
Absolutely. God, you are wired in a unique way with unique gifts, unique opportunities, unique skills. And that's the space, the talent that you've been given, and use that to your fullest capacity. If you have a humongous platform, then use publicity. If you are strapped to a hospital bed, then use prayer. If you have, access to capital, then use capital. But, if you work in policy, then use policy, but you have something that you can offer. And with Peace Prep, you literally like your investment went right to work. You know what I mean? And that's the beautiful thing about it is it's right to work. And these kids are being treated with dignity and respect. And you're able to see that not only is this going to affect them today, it's going to affect their future and their kids and their kids' kids. And so, a simple donation is helping to create a legacy. And that's God work right there.
Lecrae, I thank you so much for doing this, being on Positive You. I really appreciate you, your heart, the difference you make, and how you're using your gifts and talents to change the world. And you're a world changer, and I appreciate you.
Appreciate you, John. It's awesome. It's an awesome opportunity.